everybody. David Fogel, CEO of the Symphonina Foundation, and I'm joined today by two-time Grammy nominee Matt B. and his wife Angela B. Benson, CEO of Vita Records. How are you guys doing?
We're good. How are you
Really
doing?
amazing.
You're doing amazing. That's correct. You are doing amazing. So the Grammy nominations came out, and I was watching some video that you guys released, and I've been where you are, except I didn't get on the other side of that like you did. But I can imagine. So I made a little note to Angela. It's like, how fast was your heart beating right before you found out that Alkebulan II got nominated? What category is it again? World music, correct?
It's Best Global Music Album.
Best global music. Best global music. Yeah. So how fast was your heart beating? It looked like it was doing like a hummingbird time.
200 million beats per second.
All right, we need scientific notation to have heartbeats that high. Okay.
So nerve-wracking.
It's
I don't know
good.
if that's my favorite part.
No, it's probably not your favorite part, I'm guessing. But maybe the favorite part's coming. So on February 2nd, my birthday, you have the Grammy event. And tell me about what your plans are to attend the Grammys.
It's just gonna be fun. Grammy week is really fun. It's an opportunity for us to really just hang out with our peers and see a lot of people that we don't typically see because they live all around the world. So I think that Grammy week is when a lot of future collaborations start to blossom and people just get to catch up with everyone. So we're really looking forward to that. We're also just looking forward to all of the Grammy festivities and the Grammys do a really great job of being very inviting and very welcoming to those who have been nominated and just enjoying the moment and the ambiance.
Yeah, so Alkebulan II, now I attended your early screening of it earlier this year, a couple months ago, which was great. Are you going to re-release that? We're going to have any more events that we can go to, ask some follow-up questions, things like that, meet you in person again?
So it'll be formally released sometime in Q1 of 2025. The premiere was kind of like an advanced screening somewhat of film. So that was more so for people who are close to us and inside of the industry to really take in the album, take in the film, and all that Alkebulan II has to offer. But we still are refining a few things, but it will formally be released in Q1 of 2025. So we'll formally put something out for people to have an exact date, probably sometime in January-ish. But yeah, you can follow at Matt B World for all those updates.
There we go. All right, so it's TBD and follow for more. That's what we're gonna do. Hey, let's go back and tell a little bit of your story. We had the opportunity to do a printed interview with you earlier, but now we have the opportunity to actually have a conversation. So I want to go back a little bit and let you have the opportunity to tell us about the roots of Alkebulan II and how it grew out of Alkebulan. Then I can ask you a few questions that have been on my mind since that interview. So tell me about how Alkebulan started and then how you got into doing Alkebulan II, and importantly, your pit stop at Abbey Road with one of our favorite orchestras there.
Yeah, it was an amazing process for Alkebulan I. It was very much so a journey of discovery, trying to figure out my ancestral roots as well as Angela's, and just trying to figure out a way to tell that story as effectively as we could. And obviously, with being musicians, the best way of telling that story is through music. Alkebulan II was a way of building on that story, but for this particular one, it was diving deeper. It was an opportunity to explore not only the continent of Africa, but also a deeper meaning of what it meant to be African, what it meant to uh, the struggles, the ups and downs of figuring out our ancestral roots and answering that age-old question of why. Why is this happening? Why are we pursuing this? What does it mean to us? And then we just unfolded that a bit more by bringing in the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, which was, oh, every time I say that, it blows my mind to know that they were so gracious and willing to play on the project, and then the icing on the cake being Abbey Road Studios. So we put a lot of work into it. We really did. This was something that was conceived what would feel to be relatively quickly, but it being the continuation of Alkebulan 1, you know that Alkebulan 1 took 2 years to make. So we always knew that we were going to continue that story. So this was in our minds, and it was just manifested into reality at this point.
Yeah, so you're on your way to Africa to film for Alkebulan II, and as I remember from our interview, you had never done any cinematography previously, right? I mean, it's all self-taught DIY, like, buy the red cameras and let's see if we can get them there without damaging them, kind of thing, right? So actually,
Yeah,
what is it like traveling with all that equipment halfway around the world?
a nightmare. That's what it was like, a
Not
freaking
fun.
nightmare. And it's interesting because it's so meticulous. Like the US government or just governments in general, they really don't like it when you bring expensive stuff into their country
Mm,
because they feel as though you may try and sell it or
right.
do something else, I guess, nefarious. But so they're very meticulous about what you're bringing and why, and
Hmm.
having that itemized list of what you're bringing, so that way they can check everything before you enter into the country, and then they can check everything before you exit to make sure you're leaving with the same amount of goods that you went into the country with. And then
Mm,
there's also those logistics of trying to figure out how to cost effectively bring those things, and trying to minimize the amount of suitcases that you have, the weight of those suitcases, all of the other in betweens, and then like praying to God that the airline does not make the mistake of leaving your stuff on the tarmac inside of the other country, which honestly happened to us when we were leaving
oh
from
goodness.
Namibia to South Africa.
Hmm.
They left 3 out of our 4. Was it 3 out of 4
Yeah.
in Namibia? And we were supposed to be filming that same day. So when we made it, we were like, "Where's the rest of our stuff?" And we had air tags inside of the
Good
suitcases.
thinking.
So we were able to see where they were, and we saw they were exactly in the same spot left on the tarmac. And it ended up
Oh,
coming.
my.
The suitcases ended up coming like
The
maybe
next
a day
day.
later.
Okay.
But boy, was that nerve wracking.
I bet. Gosh.
And all of the wardrobe was in there. So it wasn't even something where we were like, oh, we can just rent some other gear and just do what we need to do in the meantime because at least we have the clothes. Nope, nothing. So
Yeah.
that was not
So for those who haven't seen the film, Matt and other performers are there in costume and bringing their costumes with them. They wanted to be as authentic as they could make it. And so yeah, to have 3/4 of your bag sitting someplace else is not a good sign.
that
But
helpful.
but you guys did great. I mean, the I thoroughly enjoyed the whole experience viewing it, and I thoroughly encourage others to see it when you get it released in the first quarter. I think I wanted to ask you. We were talking about African roots music, which has many different varieties, as we talked about in our interview, and then how you had the idea to meld orchestral music with it. If you can talk a little bit about what that orchestral music idea, where that came from, and what it signifies to you as kind of an amplification of that music, or maybe something else.
Yeah, that was something that Angela and I just really wanted to do. I know for myself, fresh out of high school, internship, I was at Vandercook College of Music, which is located in Chicago, and just seeing that orchestra play and just being exposed to that. Outside of some of the other things that I was exposed to as a kid, I just knew that that was something that I always wanted to do. And Angela, being the amazing entrepreneur, manager, CEO that she is, when she saw the opportunity, she was just like, "Hey, this could potentially be something that we can really make happen." And logistically, she helped to kind of put all of that together. Musically, it just was a dream come true. But I feel like I've been doing quite a bit of talking, so I'll pass it on to Angela.
Oh, I mean, that was the origin, and that really was all I was going to say. To add, I think that the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra added that extra cinematic flair that we were looking for, as especially as it pertains to the film. We wanted people to be able to listen to the album and feel it, but then when they put the visual to the album, they were able to be fully immersed in the experience. And I feel like adding the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra added an extra layer that felt not only still authentic to what it was we were trying to create, but it also added a layer of familiarity because classical orchestral music is obviously notoriously layered inside of cinema pieces anyway. So we felt that by adding that, that added an extra layer that gave us just a nice little sparkle.
Yeah, and perhaps it also increases the global music, right? I think
Exactly.
you know,
Yeah.
it's that extra little seasoning that adds the global
Yes.
music touch to
We
it. I
love
think.
seasoning.
Yeah,
I agree, it does.
yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your experience at Abbey Road while you're having the orchestra record. I know, again, we covered some of these things in the interview that we did, which I do encourage people to go read. It's a great interview that you guys gave me. But let's talk a little bit about the experience being in that studio, the history of it, how you felt in that regard, and like, what's it like when the orchestra first starts playing your music?
When the orchestra first started playing, it was mind blowing because it's one thing to talk about it, and then it's another thing to experience it. And there's all of that anticipation of packing your stuff up and then flying overseas and then going to your hotel and then stepping foot into Abbey Road and just looking around and absorbing the ambiance that is all that Abbey Road has to offer, and then being around all of these phenomenal musicians, and then that moment of when the conductor just stands and he's preparing the orchestra to play, and your heart just starts racing thinking like, oh my god, like it's about to happen, and then just boom, like it just happens and you're just like, oh, like it's so overwhelming but such an amazing experience.
You tell me, did it go really quickly once it started? Like, did time
Yes.
just go boop and it's done, right?
Yeah, you blink and it's
Yeah,
over.
I know. I know.
Yeah.
It's
So
I
much
totally
prep. And
yeah.
then like you prepare for months and months and months with the score producers and all of the in-betweens with the writers, and then it's the booking of the flights, the preparing the sessions, all of this coordinating, and then all of a sudden you do the session and then you're like, okay, we're done.
And it was really interesting to see how their take on the music,
Mhm.
because there is that human element, right?
Yeah.
So, and granted, all of these guys are professionals, so they know exactly what they're doing. But everyone, being a human, they add their own flair to to the overall pieces. And something that really stood out to me would be when Star replaced
That's
one
Star
of the flutes.
Parodi for everybody.
Yeah, Star Parodi, when
Mhm.
she replaced one of the flutes with a
Penny
penny
whistle.
whistle.
Oh,
and
interesting.
and oh my god, like probably one of my favorite things that happened during that session, because when I heard that player play on that penny whistle, it was like, wow, like this, it just brought a completely different element. And then for the conductor, for him to just be making changes on the fly and saying things like, I know that it was supposed to be like this, but I want to experiment and I want it to be like that. I just want to see how that feels. I
Mhm.
know that this was written like this, but I think that it should be like that. And he was like really making just real time changes. And the changes that he was making, it turned out beautiful. And that's
Great.
not something that I necessarily expected. I don't think Angela expected it either, but it was welcomed.
Yes.
That's great. Yeah, Angela, go ahead.
The conductor's name is Nicholas Dodd. He is an absolute jewel to work with. He's an icon in the industry and does a lot of the conducting for a lot of the big Hollywood films. So we were very blessed to have him conduct the sessions for Alkebulan II and help to bring a lot of life into the album, but also his own creative direction, as Matt spoke to. I feel like having our team as a whole, everyone brought their own uniqueness. And that was something that we encouraged everyone to. A lot of people, when they came into the room, they asked Matt, what do you want? What do you want this to be? What do you want it to sound like? And he was like, I already laid down the groundwork and now I want you guys to do your part. And so I think that that honestly was what got us the amazing result that we got, because it wasn't just Matt's mind, it wasn't just my mind, it was all of the minds together, from us to Kit Wakely to MB Gordy to Brent Fisher, all of the brilliant producers from Africa, BIT and Bashkilla. They all did a phenomenal job with putting their fingerprints on it. And then Matt and I just kind of glued everything together to create the product that everyone hears now. So we're all very blessed.
I think Jeff Fair was in there too, if I remember correctly.
He was.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
I hope I'm helping you just remember one person you might have left out.
I know, right?
There's a long list. I know,
and that's the problem right there, right? When you start naming people's names, now you have to make sure you.
Yeah. So we apologize to anyone who was left out in that, but that's great, because a lot of times, you know, when a composer goes to have orchestral music, really anything, but orchestral music in particular, they want it the way they want it, and the conductor is not probably going to say, hey, let's experiment with your time that you're paying for in this way and that way, because the composer would say, no, we're just going to just play it, and then I'll tell you what we need to change, you know. But I think when you're in that collaborative mode there like that, and everybody is working with a great vision together, then it can be wonderful. And so that's good advice too, to be able to open things up, if you want to take that risk as a composer. And it sounds like, you know, you're very glad that you did. So that's terrific. In terms of developing the scores, I don't know if you have an orchestral composition background, Matt or Angela. So if you do, that's great. You can tell us about that. If not, how do you work with someone to develop that orchestral score so that when it gets in front of the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, everything goes like clockwork?
Actually, I don't have a background in that, which honestly just made this so interesting. Because it's one of those things where it's like, oh, wow, this guy is going to do what? How? You know what I mean? So Brent and Kit in particular were so gracious to really give me that creativity, that creative space to be able to be like, hey, this is kind of what I'm thinking. This is kind of how I want it. These are the instruments that I'm thinking should be used and why. And then for them to build off of what my thought process was. And then for me to be able to just send notes to them back and forth, whether it was just a couple of melodies or whatever the case may be, just in order to get it done. And Brent, you know, he works on so many different things. So does Kit. So for them to be able to just kind of carve out that time and be like, hey, Matt, we're really dedicated to this project. This is what we're willing to bring to the table. It was exhilarating. And one thing that I also will say, after I gave them kind of the free rein to kind of do what they needed to do, and they wrote their parts, they didn't play them for me or send me anything other than, like, they sent me the sheet music and stuff like that. But other than that, like, I was kind of left in the dark outside of just like the sheet music that they sent maybe a couple of days before we went in session. So a lot of what I was hearing for the first time.
Absolutely, right. If you're not familiar with score following orchestral music, giving you the sheet music is nice, but you really can't hear it in your head if you're not like super familiar with it, right? So
exactly.
But yeah. I think going to that, that goes back to trusting your team.
Absolutely, right.
Trusting the process and allowing people that creative space and really believing in what it was that they were capable of doing, because we have that level of trust and that rapport with both Kit and Brent, we knew that whatever they were going to come with was going to be on point, and it was going to be in the space and the vein that we were looking for. So because we have that level of trust, we were able to say, well, I don't necessarily need to hear this, because I know that you had the directions, you have the vision, and your talent and your brilliant mind is going to take us the rest of the way. So, though, of course, we would have loved to have heard it, but I didn't really need to, you know? So I think that just goes back to, once again, full circle, trust the process. A lot of people feel like you have to have so much control and need to listen to this and hear that. But if you really just believe in your team and you trust the process, sometimes you get the best result.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I guess management tactics, I guess, or whatever the right phrase would be, are different for every person, and what works for one person may not work for another. Some people really
might not
have to be micromanagers, and some people are just hands off and let it all happen. And a lot of people are in between there, of course. Like, I'm sure you have a lot of meticulous detail and things that you do. And then there's other things where you're just saying, hey, we trust and that's how it's going to go. And making great decisions there leads to great outcomes. So, and hopefully the bad decisions have been made well in the past and we've all learned from them. So
I think
we know
the
not to
beauty
make
of
those again. There you go.
the beauty of Pro Tools though is that it gives you that flexibility and that leeway because it's not like we're recording to tape, right?
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
there's no going back in that in a lot of ways. But when you're recording with Pro Tools, you have all of these tracks and you can always mute stuff. Like if push comes to shove, you can mute stuff. And for me, even during the early production, a lot of stuff that got muted. Like there was production that got done in Africa that was set as kind of like a foundation. And then when MB came in and he played like a lot of like the drums and all the rest of that stuff,
Mhm.
Angela and I just made the decision right then and there. We were like, you want to know what? For these interludes, a lot of this other production doesn't make sense. So we're
Mhm.
just going to mute it all. We're going to keep the drums from Africa and the drums from MB. Maybe some other things like some flares here and there that we had in there. But other than that, it was more so a skeleton to be built off of. So when the orchestral elements started coming in, it just felt so nice. But a lot of people, like if you're creating in a different medium, it makes it more difficult to do that. So thank God for Pro Tools.
Yes, what would we do? What would we do? That digital audio workstations, I can hardly. Sometimes I think back to like what Mozart or Beethoven or those people must have done with an inkwell and a feather in their score sheet. I like it. Unbelievable, right? I mean, it's unbelievable, really, that any of that music can be made and survive this long. So we have it so easy now, but we still have the hard work to do, right? So
Yeah.
it's challenging, and then all the tools that we have give us the opportunities to improve upon the minor nuances all along the way and recognize them and keep working, like you're saying, to try to craft something and polish it over and over and over again. So that leads me to the next question: is when do you know that something is actually done? Because you can polish it forever in Pro Tools or whatever else, right? How do you guys are smiling. How do you know? How do you know when it's done?
Oh, that is actually that's a really good question. I think that I like to work in elements of twos and threes, right? So, and I think putting bumpers up for one stuff, or at least for me, it helps out a lot. So one thing that I say to Angela and just anyone who is just working alongside me, when I'm recording my vocals, I'm only going to do it one time. I'm not going to record my vocals and then be like, and then go back in and try and strengthen my vocal performance. Now, as far as demos go, if I'm demoing, I usually will demo in a room with no padding, no treatment at all. So that way it prevents me from wanting to keep those vocals. But
Mm.
when I'm going in and I'm recording the vocals, like for real, I'm not going to do it again. And that allows me to be like, whatever I felt in that moment, whatever I did in that moment is good enough. As far as like the production side of things, with some of the instrumentation and stuff, that's a bit more difficult. But what I will say is that space and giving the track an opportunity to breathe is just as important as trying to fill the track up, right? It's always about trying to make that space, trying to give those instruments an opportunity to shine in the best way that they can, and maybe even overproducing in order to be able to strip back to create that space. And then once it feels like it's where it needs to be, then at that point you got to just kind of leave it alone.
Now, when you and Angela are listening to it, do you ever have a disagreement? Like, no, we got to do it this way, that way, and if so, what sort of decision making path do you take?
For sure we have our disagreements. I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, Angela, a lot of times I'm too close to it.
Mm,
And because I'm too close to it, I defer to her.
mm,
And
mm.
she
Okay.
may say, but she gives me the creative space to be able to get it all out first.
Yeah.
And then once I get it all out, then she's like, yeah, no. And then I'm like, oh, and it just is what it is. But I trust her in that way because I know I'm too close. And because of that, I could end up getting emotionally attached to something that I shouldn't be emotionally attached to.
Yeah.
In which case, then she's able to come in and kind of bring me back down to earth and be like, nah. So she very much so in a nutshell, she gives me the creative space to be like, I'm gonna just, throwing it's like throwing up on a wall, right? And then from there, she is subtracting and being like, yeah, you don't need this, you don't need that, you don't need this. And then from there, then she's like, but you do need this and you do need that. And then that's when the real creativity really starts to spawn, because now she's bringing in all of these different musicians and all the rest of that different stuff. What would it be like if we put this on there or that on there, or whatever the case may be? So it's very much so a collaborative effort.
Yeah, I think that that is 100% spot on. I think that from my space, since I'm not the artist in the traditional sense, it's really important for the artist to get all of their creative ideas out. I don't think it's smart to stifle an idea before it's even born, because if you can't fully realize the idea, you don't know how it's going to morph and shapeshift as it's coming out. So it may come out questionable, but it may end on a great note. So you have to let it see the whole process through. And then at the end, unless it's just something really left field, and that's very rare, but at the end, that's usually when I come in and I'm like, I think that we should veer in this direction or stay this course and add, insert the blank. And a lot of that happened in the beginning stages. Like, for an example, on the song Kawani, initially the track was just layered vocals with just Matt and the writer, and there were a bunch of harmonies, and it sounded great. But I felt like it would have been so much more beautiful, impactful, and spiritual to add a choir. And so we searched all throughout South Africa to find one, and we landed with Amazwi 8. And that's how they ended up on Kowani, because I felt that while the vocal layers were great, it would have been much more impactful to have that fuller picture of the choir. So things like that were decisions that were made in that process, and they really helped to fully develop and realize the overall scope of the album. So for me, when I know something is done, I go based on feeling, because that really is my best gauge, is my heart and what I feel in my spirit. So whenever I feel a record hit me, I get all the goosebumps and all the chills. And that's usually when I know it's right. Even if there's mistakes that people feel need to be corrected, or, oh, this technically speaking is not right, I go based on the feeling. And if it hits me, especially because I am not the artist creating the work, I have the vantage point of both sides, because I'm creating in the room, but I'm also an audience member as well. So I think that that is valuable, because then I can gauge both ends. So I know if it hits me in that way, then it probably is going to hit someone else in the same way. So if it makes me cry, it's probably going to make somebody else cry. So then I know it's right. That's how I gauge stuff.
Yeah, two things. So if I could succinctly paraphrase that, I think what you've said is something like, good art is the art of subtraction and addition.
Ah.
But brilliance comes from something like, oh, and we need a choir. Right? Because like for just a random thing, like it'd be, oh, we need an oboe. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like knowing intuitively what you needed in that spot. There's no formula for that, right? That's your own, that comes from within, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so that's a testament to your own creativity and brilliance, really, to know what it is that you create and what you want to create and how you want to change something. What is the addition? Okay, right? Subtraction's easier, right? We know what's there. What is there to subtract? Adding is the hard part, where you're like, okay, we need a choir, and then trying to figure out which one. So kudos to you, and I think that's really, always, it should be first in mind as we're creating generally. I think that process of what more do we need, and when are we done, and then what can we take out? Really, what's unnecessary? Maybe it's getting in the way, right? Write some nice part, but it's really kind of stepping on the melody or something. It's tough to let these things go sometimes, but that's why we have Angela. Okay, so let me take a step back for people who don't know both of you very well, and let you have an opportunity to tell us how you met and also both your musical backgrounds.
So, Matt, I've known Matt since 2009. So a very, very, very long time. At least long for me, because
Yep.
not 65 or something. But we met in 2009, and I met him at the start of his solo career because he had already been doing music for how many years?
Since I was about 12 or 13 years old,
Yeah.
as in a group with my brothers.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
initially he was in a group with his brothers, have been doing music pretty much his whole life. And at that stage, he had split off from his brothers and wanted to do something solo. And I happened to know one of his brothers. And unbeknownst to me at the time, I didn't even know he had siblings. I thought he was an only child. So then he had told me, hey, my brother is going solo. I'd love to introduce you to him, blah, blah, blah. So in that context, I was supposed to be modeling for a photo shoot for one of his album. I think it was the album cover, or was it promo photos or something like that. So we met in Millennium Park at Chicago, and that was where we first met. We did the photo shoot, and then from there, it just kind of developed over time into a, well, how can we rebrand your MySpace? Because that was a thing.
Yeah.
How can we and your Facebook? How can we do all of these things? And I had been doing Photoshop and things in that creative space ever since I was really small. I self-taught myself how to graphic design and all that stuff. So Matt had me helping to design a lot of his flyers that we then printed and passed them around all throughout Chicago. And then that kind of morphed into, oh, well, if we're passing out flyers, we should burn CDs and start passing out your mixtapes. So then that was kind of how we started. Matt's career as a solo artist was very grassroots, very just two people just trying to figure out what worked versus what didn't. So there was a lot of experimentation happening during that time. And then in the background, we ended up dating in 2011 and literally have just been inseparable since then. We got married in 2012. We have three beautiful children, and have been simultaneously building a life together while also building our empire. So that's kind of how we met in a nutshell. In 2014, Matt ended up getting signed to a record label in Japan. And really, I should say he was approached by a record label in Japan, and the label was called Starbase. And the label was interested in signing Matt. And instead of signing Matt to this unknown label that were not familiar with, we wanted to protect him and maintain the ownership of Matt and his creative artistry. So that was how Vita Records was born, our record label. It was started just by us two in our living room, and we did a partnership deal between ourselves and Starbase. And that was when Matt got his first #1 album in Japan, and then went on to release another album, the sophomore album. Both of these were exclusive releases to the Japanese territory, and he ended up going #1 again. And that kind of started the career, which is kind of backwards. Most people go US and then overseas, but we went overseas and then came back here. So that was like the what 10-year story in a nutshell.
Yeah, well, and another testament to your thinking outside the box, right? So you want a solution. So what's the solution? You create your own record label and then do a partnership deal. Like not everybody would think to do that. So congratulations
Yeah.
again to you both for thing. And we need a choir. So there we go. Yeah, Matt, how did so you started singing with your family?
Yeah,
But was that the impetus for getting into music in the first place, or how did that go?
I come from a very, very musical family. My grandmother probably was, I mean, honestly, if we're really going back, I guess this whole musical journey started in 1919 when my
Okay.
grandmother was born,
Ah,
one of
okay.
12,
One of
and
12. Wow.
her family, or I rather I should say, my family, but particularly her immediate family, right? They were all musicians, and all of them. And she traveled with her brothers and sisters across the United States during the Green Book era, which was an era when African Americans, it wasn't safe for African Americans to travel throughout the United States or Canada. So there was a Green Book that was created that kind of gave a guide of where it was safe to go in the United States. So it was very brave of her to be willing to do that during that era. And she traveled all throughout the US, portions of Canada, eventually made her way to Chicago and settled down with my grandfather and was just in the church. So much so that Thomas A. Dorsey, who was the father of gospel music, was also at the same church as her and was actually creating in that medium around the same time that she was there in his choir, et cetera, et cetera. So very much so a part of a musical family. My cousin being an opera singer, my sister being an opera singer, my brother going overseas and performing for presidents in Korea, et cetera, et cetera. And then prior to that, me and my brothers being in the church and performing at the church and things like that. My mother really helping to hone and help us craft that. And then eventually, at when my brothers got a little older, me being the youngest, we started a group, the three of us. And from there, we just were performing all around the US and performing at talent shows and things like that, with one of my oldest brothers helping to manage the situation. And we made a lot of mistakes, a lot of mistakes. But during that time, I learned so much. You know, I was only like 13 years old, 14 years old, and I'm learning from my older brothers and from the experiences that we have of like, what is a music contract? How do you read a music contract? What is the best deal to take, et cetera, et cetera. And us talking amongst one another and being like, after all is said and done, like, we have to create our own. We have to do that because that's the only way that we're going to be able to move forward in this industry. Now, granted, my brothers decided that that wasn't something that long term they wanted to do, but I kept pursuing it. So I just imagine that, I'm 19, 20 something years old. At this point, I've already had almost 10 years worth of experience in the music industry, for better
Yeah.
or for worse.
Yeah.
And now I have all of this knowledge, and now I'm bringing Angela in to all of this knowledge that I have gained, and I knew enough to get by, but I still had a lot to learn. So now we're embarking on this journey together, which is why we knew that we wanted to do the label, and we knew that not only from the conversations that we had had with one another, but also from the 10 years worth of experience, better or for worse, that I had with my brothers. So it was almost like a training camp, so to speak. The mistakes of going on stage and not realizing how sound travels, and that by the time, like, if you're in a big room, by the time it makes it back to you, like, you're already a couple of clicks behind, right?
Right.
Like, especially if you don't have in-ears, and like those types of situations, or performing on television and things like that. Like, I was doing these things at like 15, 16 years old. And I remember even doing Showtime at the Apollo
Mm.
in New York.
Hmm.
And I was probably like 17 when I did that. So it's like these types of things that really helped to shape me
Yeah.
as and grew me as an artist. Opportunities and things that most artists would never have had before. So in ways, a lot of what Angela and I were doing together was very new to me. But in other ways, I had a lot of experience at a very young age that allowed me to navigate it in a way that most wouldn't have been able to.
Yeah. It's a
So I
great.
don't know. I hope that kind of.
No, that's great background, and sets you up very well for a lot more success to come. So speaking of to come, what's your next project? What's coming up after Alkebulan II is
What can we speak
put
on?
in the annals of history?
So, obviously, Matt is always creating. So, we have a lot of projects that are already slated as far out as the next 2 years. So, 2025 and 2026. So, we definitely are going to be creating a very large scale project that will likely include another film. I won't say anything
Excellent.
more than but
Excellent.
it will be very similar in spirit to what it is that we created, but it's going to have a lot more elaborate detail. Um, And in addition to that, outside of just the big project that we'll be working on, Matt is also doing a lot of smaller EPs and singles with and collaborations with other artists across the spectrum of artists here, composers and producers here, as well as overseas in Africa. So it's really just about building and continuing to lay a foundation brick by brick every day, and having Matt continuously in a state of writing, continually in a space of creating and inspiration. So we do plan on traveling back to go to Africa and visit different countries. Our goal, fingers crossed, is we'll be going to Nigeria and Ghana. That's on our list of places to go and explore, not only for music purposes, but also to expose ourselves to other parts of African culture that we haven't personally explored yet ourselves. And hopefully that will serve as kind of a landscape for us to be able to find and seek that inspiration for the next project, because it's not always about just, I'm not just creating things to just do it. We believe with both ourselves as people and representing the label in creating work that hits home, work that we feel is generationally impactful. So we don't want to create without purpose, and that purpose is found in life experiences. So in order to find those life experiences, we have to live life. So the plan next year is to definitely do some more traveling and experience some more cultures, go see some sites that we haven't seen before, even in Europe and places like that. So so we definitely are going to be doing a lot of projects. Hopefully there'll be some shiny gold something happening in our future as well.
Sure.
But yeah, we're constantly moving, constantly growing, constantly in a state of learning. I firmly believe in life that we're always a student. So I don't ever want to feel like I have stopped learning. I always want to feel like every day I'm learning something new. I'm learning a new skill. I'm learning something that I never was exposed to. And I feel like that is what makes life fruitful, but it also is what makes the music great.
And if I can add on that, I think also Matt is touring a little bit, right?
Yes.
I
Yes.
do
That was
remember
the
that.
other thing I forgot.
Yeah,
So he
so
will be doing another part of the tour. The tour, we kind of did leg one, that just ended here in LA.
mhm.
So we'll probably be announcing dates for leg two. Our hope is to be able to take leg two into other portions of the US, as well as possibly being able to go overseas. But it really just depends on timing with other projects and all of the other things that Matt has on his very busy plate. So,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that's the hope. But yes, touring will be in the future for 2025 too.
If people want to get in touch with you or see where that tour schedule is, what's the best way to do so?
To see all things Matt B, he's very active on social media at Matt B World, MATTB World. That's on all platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. But to get a more in-depth dive, it's mattbworld.com. So that will show you his bio, that'll show you all of his upcoming tour dates, all of the things in Matt B's world. Because that's where I'd like to live. So please join me.
Absolutely. Well, as we're recording here today, it's the day before Thanksgiving, so I want to wish you and your family a great Thanksgiving for tomorrow, and for your Grammy Award for nomination, I should say, for Best Global Music Album. We'll have
Speak into existence, David.
we're gonna exactly right. Okay, we're gonna keep our fingers crossed for you for Alkebulan II, and if there's the Alkebulan III that was alluded to, we're gonna keep our fingers crossed in advance for that. And hopefully Matt will be available for other collaborations along the way that will involve orchestral music, and we'll be happy to pursue those. And in the meantime, like I said, I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.